Hello everyone. Today we're going to continue our Bible stories. If you remember, on the last time we met, we did the story of Moses, and remember how his mother Joabed put him in a basket and put him in the Nile River in hopes that he would be saved, and then the princess comes along and saves him, and then she hires the mother to come live there and take care of him and nurse him until he's able to eat on his own. So I love that story. This next one is called, continuing on with Moses and Pharaoh. So if you look right here, you'll see some really cool looking pictures. There he is peeking around there behind that column. And then over here we see a bunch of frogs. That's pretty crazy. And then on the next page, what do we see? We see Moses up here. I don't know what's happening in this part. We will read it and see. That's the best thing about reading. You can look at the pictures, but you need to read it to see what's really going on. One day, an old man named Shaul said to his grandson Simeon, "It is a time that you learn the story of our people. I want to tell you about a tragic time for the Israelites, the time we spent in Egypt, and a great man named Moses who saved us from slavery." Simeon was at his grandfather's feet and listened to the story. Many years ago, there weren't a lot of books, and so stories were told. Their children would sit right down there and they would listen to the stories of their parents and their grandparents. I was only a boy then, just about your age, Shaul started. All of the Israelites were slaves to the terrible Pharaoh, who was the ruler of Egypt. Everyone, even the children, worked all day and all into the night making bricks to build Pharaoh's city. "One day I saw Moses walking proudly to Pharaoh's palace," said Shaul. "I was such a curious boy then. I dropped my work and I crept away. I wanted to hear what Moses had to say. Moses asked Pharaoh to let the Israelites go free. He warned them that if he did not let them go, God would send a plague. A plague is like a very, 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 very bad sickness. We've seen a plague or a virus right here in our country for the last few months, and it's a very bad thing. A lot of people die from the plague. But Pharaoh, even though he had warned him, did not do anything. He got up and he walked into the palace. Days later, I woke up to hear a strange rumbling throughout the city. And when I listened more closely, it sounded like croaking. I looked outside and I saw that the land was covered with frogs. They were on the roads, they were on the rooftops, they were in the wells, and they were all over Pharaoh's palace." So there's where the frogs came from. God sent the frogs. How many of you would like to have to go outside and find frogs everywhere? Not me, they kind of creep me out. I don't mind seeing a few frogs, but a whole yard full? "Where did they come from?" Simeon asked his grandfather. Moses had warned Pharaoh that many terrible plagues would fall over Egypt if God's people were not set free, Shaul exclaimed. This was a plague that God sent. It was not the first sign that God sent to Egypt, and it would not be the last. Pharaoh promised to set the Israelites free if Moses would ask God to take the frogs away. But when the frogs were gone, guess what Pharaoh did? He broke his promise. He was wanting to get what he wanted, and then he was going to go back on his word or break his promise. Then God sent swarms of flies upon Europe. He made the Egyptians' cattle very sick, and then he pounded the land with hailstorms, and then he took away the sunshine. Each time these tragedies fell on Egypt, Moses would go back to Pharaoh and demand that he set the people free. At last, God's powers became too much for Pharaoh and his people, Shaul told his grandson. So he finally agreed to let Moses go with the people. "Moses came to bring my family the good news. Moses told us to leave as quickly as we could. We didn't even have time to pack our belongings. We left Egypt with nothing and journeyed into the desert." Shaul said it was very hot and very dry, but at least we were free from Pharaoh and his soldiers. Then one day we saw an army of Egyptians coming after us. Now remember, Pharaoh had let them go. So all the Egyptians are getting ready to come after them. You say, why are they doing that? Because he said they could go. Because Pharaoh changed his mind again. He said you can go, and then after he saw all of them were going, he didn't have anybody to do his work. So he sent them after them. Let's see what happened. As I said, Pharaoh had changed his mind. Pharaoh wanted to bring us all back to Egypt, but Moses was our leader and God was our Savior. He said, I came upon a miracle that day, Shaul added. With Pharaoh and his men chasing after us, we came upon a sea. It's called the Red Sea. We had nowhere to turn. Then Moses raised his hand over the sea and the waters parted. There's where that picture was. Do you see Moses? He's holding his rod up high, and look what's happening to the sea. It's opening up. So we started to walk, 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 walk. And once we had crossed, Moses turned back toward the sea and raised his hand again. And this time, the water flowed over Pharaoh and his soldiers. So he parted the Red Sea, and then he closed it back up again. Those were some amazing miracles. Once we had crossed, Moses turned toward the sea and raised his hand again, and the waters went over all those people following them, the Egyptians. We were safe, said Shaul, and we continued our difficult journey through the desert. What happened? What happened? Asked Simeon. Did you survive? Let's see what happens. It's not a happy story, said Shaul. We walked through the hot desert with very little to eat for many years. We suffered greatly, but still we sang songs to God and we prayed, and He provided food for us. If you remember the story, they were getting really hungry, and all of a sudden these little white flakes started coming down. They're called manna, so God sent those to them to eat. But another thing is, I've been reading my Bible lately, and guess what? The time that it would normally take to get to the land they were going to, if they went straight without any wandering or any trouble, it would only take them 11 days to get there. But guess what? They wandered around in that desert, going around in circles and around for 40 years. Now that's a sad story. Then one day Moses told everybody to wait for him, and he was going to climb up to the top of the mountaintop. Finally, Moses returned with 2 tablets containing the laws that God had spoken to him. See, right there he's holding them up. Back then they didn't have pencil and paper, and they had to write on tablets. So he told everybody to wait, and finally he returned with the tablets containing the laws that God had spoken to them. They were called the 10 Commandments from God. I know them all, he told his grandfather. You taught them to me. We followed the laws that God had commanded, Shaul continued, and we followed Moses as he led us through the desert. God did take care of us. He brought us to this place now, which we call Israel. It is our promised land, our country, and our home. God watched over his children in the desert, said Shaul. He watches over us wherever we are. And once we had a great hero named Moses to remind us of that. Now we have each other. We have the 10 Commandments to guide us, and we have a very important story to tell our children and our grandchildren. Next time we will look at the 10 Commandments and see what they say. Thank you. Have a good day.